The pounding came at midnight. Bryony Ashford jerked awake in her chair by the dying fire, the book she'd been reading tumbling from her lap to the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud in the silent house. For a moment, she sat frozen, heart hammering, convinced she'd dreamed it. Then it came again. 3 sharp blows against the front door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. No one knocked at midnight. Not in their modest neighborhood on the unfashionable edge of London. Not at a house where the only occupants were a sleeping mother, a brother who hadn't come home in 3 days, and a 22-year-old woman who should have been in bed hours ago. Bryony rose slowly, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. She pulled her worn shawl tighter around her nightdress and moved toward the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Rain lashed the street outside, turning the cobblestones into rivers of reflected lamplight. A carriage stood at the curb, black and gleaming, its horses stamping impatiently. The crest on its door was obscured by darkness, but even from here, she could see it was expensive, the kind of carriage that never stopped in this part of the city. The pounding came again, more insistent. Her throat went dry. She should wake her mother. She should call for help. She should do anything except what she was doing, which was walking toward the door with trembling hands and reaching for the latch. The door swung open, and the rain-soaked night rushed in. He stood on her doorstep like a figure carved from shadow and fury. Tall, impossibly tall, and with broad shoulders that blocked out what little light came from the street. Water streamed down his dark greatcoat, dripped from the sharp line of his jaw. His hair was black as ink, plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, when they met hers, were the pale gray of winter storms. Those eyes moved over her once, quick and assessing, taking in her nightdress, her bare feet, her unbound hair falling past her shoulders. Something passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something else she couldn't name. Then his gaze hardened to ice. Miss Ashford. His voice was low, clipped, carrying the unmistakable polish of privilege. It wasn't a question. Yes. Her own voice came out smaller than she intended. Who are you? What do you want? He reached into his coat and withdrew something, a folded piece of paper, damp at the edges, the seal broken. He held it up between 2 gloved fingers, and Bryony's blood turned to ice in her veins. She knew that paper, knew the particular shade of cream, the slightly frayed edge where she'd torn it hastily from her writing desk. Knew her own handwriting, visible even in the dim light, looping across the page in the careless script of someone who never expected these words to be read by anyone except their intended recipient. Is this, he said, each word precise as a blade, yours? Bryony couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The letter she'd written 5 days ago, late at night, full of frustration and fury and things she should never have committed to paper. The letter she'd sent to her cousin Adelaide, except Adelaide lived at 14 Wren Lane, and the Duke of Ashworth's London residence was 14 Wrenbury Lane. 1 street, 1 missing syllable, 1 catastrophic mistake. She stepped backward involuntarily. I can explain. Can you? He advanced across the threshold, and she retreated further, too stunned to protest the impropriety of a strange man entering her home uninvited at midnight. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a trap springing shut. Then please, Miss Ashford, explain to me why I received a letter addressed to someone named Adelaide, containing a rather detailed account of my personal failings. Her back hit the wall of the narrow entryway. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that she could smell rain and cedar and something darker beneath, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw. You wrote, he continued, reaching into his coat again, and withdrawing more pages. Her pages, for her words, that the Duke of Ashworth is, and I quote, A man of staggering arrogance who treats those beneath his station as furniture to be moved or discarded at will. Her stomach plummeted. You wrote that I am rumored to have such a temper that servants flee my household within months. He flipped to another page. That my father died of a broken heart because I was too cold to give him comfort in his final days. I didn't mean that I am, he cut her off, his voice dropping to something almost soft, almost dangerous. The worst kind of aristocrat. Titled, wealthy, utterly devoid of human feeling. Silence fell between them, broken only by the rain hammering against the windows and the frantic pounding of Bryony's heart. She should apologize. She should fall to her knees and beg forgiveness. She should do something, anything, to fix this impossible situation. Instead, she lifted her chin. Well, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You've just barged into my home uninvited at midnight, frightened me half to death, and backed me against a wall. You're not exactly disproving my assessment. His eyebrows rose. For one terrible moment, she thought he might actually strike her. His expression darkened, his hands clenched at his sides, and those winter-gray eyes blazed with something that might have been rage, or might have been something else entirely. Then, impossibly, his lips twitched. You have spine, Miss Ashford. I'll grant you that. He stepped back, giving her room to breathe, though his presence still filled the cramped entryway like smoke. Do you know who I am? You're the Duke of Ashworth, she swallowed hard, a Hadrian Vane. And do you know why I'm here, instead of simply burning your letter and forgetting you exist? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He reached into his coat one final time and withdrew another page. This one was different. Different handwriting, different paper. He held it out to her, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her eyes scanned the lines, and her confusion deepened into dread. Your Grace, I have in my possession a most illuminating piece of correspondence, written by one Miss Bryony Ashford, and intended for your eyes. The contents, if made public, would confirm every whispered rumor that has plagued your family since your father's unfortunate death. A man accused of coldness, now proven cold by an impartial witness. A man suspected of driving his father to the grave, and now condemned in writing by someone with no reason to lie. I wonder what the ton would make of such a letter. I wonder what your grandmother would say. I wonder what Lady Perdita Harlow, your intended bride, would think. Perhaps we should discuss terms. The letter was unsigned. Bryony looked up, her face ashen. I don't understand. I only wrote one letter. I only sent one letter. How does someone else have a copy? The Duke finished grimly. Someone made a copy before it reached me. Someone in my own household, or someone who intercepted it in transit. I don't know who. I don't know why. All I know is that they're threatening to destroy me with your words. But I didn't mean... She stopped, because that wasn't entirely true, was it? She had meant some of it. She'd been angry, frustrated, and full of resentment at the rumors her brother Piers brought home about his employer. She'd poured all of it onto the page, never imagining anyone except Adelaide would read it. I was venting. It was private. Private letters have a way of becoming public at the worst possible moments. His eyes bored into hers. You've put me in an impossible position, Miss Ashford. Someone is using your words as a weapon against me. If that letter is published, I lose everything. My reputation, my family's honor, a marriage alliance that's been years in the making. What do you want from me? Her voice cracked. An apology? I'll write one. I'll write a retraction. I'll do whatever you need. What I need, he said slowly, is far more complicated than an apology. He moved past her, deeper into the house, his gaze sweeping the modest parlor with its threadbare furniture and carefully mended curtains. She followed helplessly, too overwhelmed to protest his intrusion. "Your brother works for me," he said. "Piers Ashford. Junior secretary." "Yes." Her heart clenched. "Please, he had nothing to do with this. He doesn't even know I wrote, 'I'm aware.'" The Duke turned to face her. "Which is why I'm not having him thrown out on the street. Yet." The threat hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "What do you want?" she asked again. Hadrian Vane studied her for a long moment. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, the shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He looked, she realized with a start, exhausted. Not just angry. Exhausted and something else. Something that looked almost like desperation, or carefully controlled. "The blackmailer wants money," he said. "I could pay. But paying once means paying forever. The only way to end this is to make the letter worthless, to prove it wrong." "How?" His smile was thin, humorless. "By having the woman who wrote it stand beside me and tell the world she was mistaken. That she knows me. That I am nothing like the monster she described." He paused. "By having you, Miss Ashford, publicly declare that you admire me." The absurdity of it struck her like a physical blow. "You want me to lie? I want you to correct an error. You formed opinions based on rumors and gossip. You'll now form new opinions based on direct experience." He tilted his head. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer I pursue other remedies. Your brother's position. Your family's already precarious finances. I'm sure I could find ways to make my displeasure felt." "You're threatening me. I'm offering you a choice." His voice was cold, but something in his eyes suggested this wasn't easy for him. "Come to my estate. Spend the season as a guest. Be seen with me at public events. Tell anyone who asks that you wrote that letter before you knew me, and now you know better. And in exchange? Your brother's debts." He saw her flinch and nodded. "Yes, I know about those. Cleared completely. Your family's rent paid through the end of the year. And when this is over, letters of reference that will open any door you choose." Bryony's mind raced. It was madness. Impossible. She couldn't simply leave her mother, abandon her life, and pretend to admire a man she'd never met. But Piers's debts were crushing them. The rent was 3 months overdue. Her mother's health was failing, and there was no money for medicine, let alone doctors. And this man, this Duke, held her brother's future in his hands. How long? She heard herself ask. Through the end of the season, perhaps 3 months. "And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change. "Then I'll find the blackmailer eventually. But your brother will be dismissed tomorrow. Your family's creditors will be informed that no one is coming to settle their accounts. And the letter will still exist, still be published, and you will be named as its author." He stepped closer. "You will be known as the woman who slandered a duke. How do you imagine your prospects will fare then?" There was no choice. They both knew it. Bryony thought of her mother sleeping upstairs, of Piers and his foolish debts, of the dreams she'd poured into that letter. Dreams of escape, of something more, of a life beyond careful economy and endless worry. She was about to step into that life, just not the way she'd imagined. "3 conditions," she said. His eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating with me. You need me as much as I need your offer. That makes us equals." She was trembling, but she refused to let him see it. "First, my mother is told nothing of the blackmail. She believes I've been offered a position as a companion to your sister. A respectable arrangement. Done. What else? Second, when this ends, I walk away clean. No scandal attached to my name. You handle the blackmailer. I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." "Agreed. Third." She met his eyes directly. "The moment you decide this isn't working, the moment you find another solution, you tell me immediately. I won't be kept in the dark. I won't be used and discarded like furniture. Something shifted in his expression. The reference to her own words turned back on her. You have my word, he said quietly. The rain had softened to a steady hush against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 1. Hadrian Vane extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Ashford? She looked at his hand, elegant and gloved, belonging to a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. Then she looked at the letter still clutched in her fingers, the blackmailer's threat. She'd started this with careless words. Now she'd have to finish it. She took his hand. We have an agreement. His grip was firm, warm even through the leather of his glove. Something passed between them in that moment, on something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. My carriage will return for you at noon tomorrow, he said, releasing her. Pack what you need. Leave a letter for your mother. My secretary will provide the details of your supposed position. He moved toward the door, and she followed, still dazed by how quickly her life had unraveled. But at the threshold, he paused, half-turned. The candlelight caught his profile, sharp and unreadable. Miss Ashford? Yes? In your letter, you wrote that you once saw me at a distance, that you thought I looked. He seemed to struggle with the word. Sad. Her breath caught. She'd forgotten that part, the observation she'd buried among the insults, almost an afterthought. You wrote that you wondered what made a man like me so closed off. His voice was barely above a whisper. You wondered if anyone had ever bothered to ask. She couldn't speak. No one has, he said. Not once. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving her alone in the dark with the rain and the letter and the terrifying, impossible thing she'd just agreed to do. She didn't know yet that the blackmailer was closer than either of them suspected. She didn't know that the Duke of Ashworth was hiding secrets far darker than coldness. And she didn't know that by the time this was over, the letter that had ruined everything would also be the thing that saved them both. Bryony didn't sleep. She sat by the window until dawn bled gray through the curtains, watching the rain finally ease into mist, watching her reflection in the dark glass transform from a frightened girl into something harder, something determined. At 7, she heard her mother stirring upstairs. At 8, she had tea ready, the kitchen swept, a letter composed in her careful hand explaining the sudden opportunity. A position as companion to Lady Araminta Vane, an unexpected honor. Room and board provided. She would write often. The lies came easier than she'd expected. Her mother, thin and tired, accepted the news with the quiet resignation of a woman who'd long since stopped expecting good fortune, but was too weary to question it when it arrived. The Duke's household, she murmured, her hands wrapped around her teacup for warmth. Your brother will be pleased. Perhaps he can visit you there. Bryony's stomach turned. Piers didn't know yet. Piers, who worked in that household, who would see her arrive as a guest and wonder what madness had possessed his sister. She'd have to find a way to explain, to warn him, before the Duke's carriage came. I'll need to pack quickly, she said, standing. The carriage comes at noon. Her mother caught her hand as she passed. Bryony. Yes, Mama. The older woman's eyes, once bright and sharp, now clouded with illness and years of disappointment, searched her face. You're not telling me everything. I'm telling you what matters. It's a good position. The family is respectable. And the Duke himself? What sort of man is he? The question struck deeper than her mother could know. What sort of man pounds on doors at midnight? What sort of man threatens and bargains in the same breath? What sort of man notices when someone calls him sad? I don't know yet, Bryony said honestly. But I intend to find out. She spent the morning packing her meager belongings into a trunk she'd borrowed from a neighbor years ago and never returned. 2 day dresses, patched, but clean. 1 evening dress, hopelessly out of fashion, but the only one she owned. Her mother's pearl earrings, the single valuable thing they hadn't sold. Books, 3 of them, chosen carefully. A ribbon that had been her grandmother's. It all fit into one trunk with room to spare. The summary of a life going nowhere. At 11, Piers finally stumbled through the door. He looked terrible. 3 days of stubble, shadows under his eyes, clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them, which he probably had, wherever he'd been. Gaming halls, most likely. Chasing another scheme, another promise of fortune that would evaporate like morning fog. Moi Bryony. He blinked at her trunk by the door. What's happening? Close the door, she said. We need to talk. She told him everything. His reaction shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions as she spoke. Confusion when she mentioned the letter. Disbelief when she described the Duke at the door. Horror when she explained the blackmail. And something else entirely when she reached the arrangement. You agreed to this? His voice cracked. You agreed to live in his house and pretend to admire him. I agreed to save your position, and pay your debts, and keep this family from drowning. She kept her voice flat, refusing to let him see how frightened she was. Which is more than you've managed lately. The words hit their mark. Piers flinched. Bree, I've been trying. I know. She softened, reaching for his hand. I know you've been trying, but trying isn't enough anymore. So now it's my turn. But the Duke... Piers shook his head. You don't know him. He's not what the rumors say. But he's not easy. Cold, yes. Distant. He barely speaks to anyone. Even his own sister tiptoes around him like he's made of glass and blades. Then I'll be careful. And the blackmailer? Someone in that household is threatening him. Someone he trusts. I'll be walking into a situation I created. She released his hand and moved to the window, watching for the carriage. I wrote that letter, Piers. I put those words on paper, and now someone is using them as a weapon. This is my responsibility. It was a private letter. You never meant. Intent doesn't matter. Consequences do. The words hung between them, on heavy with truth neither wanted to examine. A carriage turned onto their street. Black, gleaming. The same one from last night, but now she could see the crest on its door clearly. A hawk in flight over crossed swords. The Ashworth arms. He's here, she breathed. Piers moved to her side. I'm coming with you. No. Bryony. No. She turned to face him. You stay here. Care for Mama. Do your job, and don't do anything that draws attention. If there's a traitor in that household, the last thing we need is you stumbling into the middle of it. And if something goes wrong, the carriage stopped. A footman descended to open the door. Then I'll handle it. She grabbed her trunk. I've handled everything else. She was at the door before he caught her arm. Bree. His voice wavered, filled with something softer. Guilt, perhaps, or gratitude he didn't know how to express. I'm sorry. For all of it. The debts, the schemes, Don't apologize, she said. Just be better. Then she stepped out into the pale morning light, and the footman was taking her trunk, and she was climbing into the carriage, and the door was closing behind her. She expected to be alone. She wasn't. Lady Araminta Vane sat on the opposite bench, wrapped in a traveling cloak of dove gray, her dark curls bouncing as the carriage lurched into motion. She was perhaps 19, with bright hazel eyes and a smile that seemed too wide for her delicate face. Finally, she exclaimed, leaning forward with undisguised excitement. I've been absolutely dying to meet you. Hadrian told me almost nothing, of course, because he's impossible and never explains anything. But I've already decided we're going to be wonderful friends. Bryony stared at her, momentarily speechless. I'm Minty. The girl extended her hand in a gesture that was charmingly informal. Well, Araminta officially, but no one calls me that except grandmother when she's cross, which is always, "You're Bryony, yes?" What a lovely name. Like the flower? Did you know Bryony was used in medieval medicine? Probably poisonous. Most interesting plants are. Bryony shook her offered hand weakly. "Yes, I'm Bryony." "Wonderful. Now tell me everything." Minty settled back against the cushions with the air of someone preparing for a feast. "How did you and Hadrian really meet? He said it was a letter, but that can't possibly be the whole story. My brother hasn't been interested in anything except accounts and estate management for 2 years. The idea of him seeking out a woman because of a letter is frankly astonishing." The carriage rattled over cobblestones, carrying her further from everything she knew. "It's complicated," Bryony managed. "The best things always are." Minty's smile sharpened, revealing unexpected intelligence behind her butterfly manner. "He's been different since he came home last night, you know. I heard him pacing until dawn. And this morning, at breakfast, he actually asked grandmother about the season's social calendar. She nearly fainted." "Your grandmother?" "The Dowager Duchess, Honoria. Terrifying woman, but she means well underneath all the ice." Minty waved a hand. "She's been trying to marry Hadrian off for years. He keeps refusing. Something about not wanting to inflict himself on anyone. He actually said that once. On inflict." Bryony thought of the man who'd stood in her entryway last night. The cold fury, the threats, the quiet confession that no one had ever asked what made him so closed off. "Why doesn't he want to marry?" Minty's expression shifted, the first crack in her effervescent facade. "Because of father. Because of what happened." She paused, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "Our father died 2 years ago. It was difficult. Hadrian blames himself, though he shouldn't. He was in Scotland when it happened, managing the estates. He didn't make it back in time." "In time for what?" "To say goodbye." Minty's voice dropped. "Father asked for him at the end, called his name. Hadrian didn't come. He'll never forgive himself for that." The carriage turned onto a wider avenue, the houses growing grander with each block. Bryony absorbed this new information, fitting it against what she'd written in her letter. The rumors that the Duke had been cold to his dying father. The whispers that he'd cared more for business than family. She'd been wrong. Completely. Devastatingly wrong. "I shouldn't have told you that," Minty said suddenly. "Hadrian would be furious. I won't say anything. I know." Minty's smile returned, but softer now. "That's why I told you. I've watched you for 5 minutes, and I can already tell you're not like the others." "What others?" "Lady Perdita Harlow and her ilk. The ones who smile at his title and scheme for his ring. You looked at him and saw a person, not a prize. He mentioned that, too. That you called him sad." Heat flooded Bryony's cheeks. "That was in the letter. The private letter." "Yes, well." Minty's eyes sparkled. Private things have a way of becoming important. That's rather the point of this whole adventure, isn't it?" Before Bryony could respond, the carriage slowed. Through the window, she glimpsed iron gates swinging open, a long drive lined with ancient oaks, and beyond them, a house that took her breath away. Ashworth Hall rose from the morning mist like something from a dream. Pale stone walls, endless windows catching the weak sunlight, towers that reached toward the gray sky. It was beautiful and intimidating, and utterly beyond anything she'd imagined. "Welcome to your new home," Minty said. "Try not to let it terrify you." But Bryony wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at the figure standing on the front steps, waiting. Hadrian Vane, Duke of Ashworth, dressed in riding clothes, his dark hair windswept, his gray eyes fixed on the approaching carriage with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. She didn't know yet that he'd been waiting since dawn. She didn't know that he'd read her letter 7 more times in the night, memorizing every word, trying to understand the woman who'd seen through his armor without ever meeting him. And she didn't know that the blackmailer was watching from a window above, already planning their next move. The carriage door opened before the wheels had fully stopped. Bryony descended into gray morning light, her worn boots touching gravel that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. She felt the weight of the house pressing down on her, the weight of the Duke's gaze, and the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. Hadrian Vane didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted as he watched her straighten her spine and lift her chin. "Miss Ashford," he offered his hand to help her from the carriage step. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Lady Araminta was very welcoming. She took his hand briefly, acutely aware of the warmth of his grip, even through their gloves. "She's energetic. That's one word for it." His lips twitched, and Bryony caught a glimpse of something beneath the cold exterior. Dry humor, perhaps, or simply affection for his sister that he didn't know how to express. "Hadrian, don't frighten her before she's even inside." Minty swept past them, already heading for the grand entrance. "I'm having tea sent to the Rose Parlor. Bryony needs to rest before grandmother descends." "Your grandmother is here?" Bryony's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Lady Honoria arrived this morning." Hadrian's expression hardened. "She heard rumors about my midnight excursion. Nothing specific yet, but she has questions. Questions I'll have to answer. Questions we'll answer together." He placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the steps. The touch was light, impersonal, but she felt it like a brand through the thin fabric of her dress. "Remember, Miss Ashford, you're here as my sister's companion and my guest. We met through your brother's service to my household. Everything else is private." "And the letter?" "Never happened." His voice dropped. "As far as anyone knows. You're simply a respectable young woman of modest means who caught my attention at a social event your brother brought you to. A social event that never occurred. That's the nature of useful fictions." He paused at the threshold, turning to face her. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the faint lines of tension around his mouth. He'd slept even less than she had. "You'll need to follow my lead in public. In private, you may speak freely. I find I prefer honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." "Then honestly." She met his gaze directly. "I'm terrified." Something flickered in those gray depths. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Good," he said quietly. "That means you understand the stakes." He led her inside. Ashworth Hall was even more overwhelming within. Soaring ceilings painted with pastoral scenes, marble floors that gleamed like ice, portraits of stern ancestors watching from gilt frames. Bryony tried not to gape like a country visitor at her first ball, but it was impossible. Every surface spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. "The Rose Parlor is this way." Hadrian steered her down a corridor lined with windows overlooking formal gardens. "Minty will keep you occupied while I deal with grandmother. When she's ready to meet you, I'll send word." "You make it sound like an audience with the Queen." "Not entirely inaccurate." They stopped before a door of pale wood, carved with climbing roses. Hadrian's hand fell from her back, and Bryony felt its absence like a chill. "Miss Ashford," she turned. "The letter." He paused, as if weighing words carefully. "You wrote that I seemed sad, that you wondered what made me close off. I remember. Most people see my title, my position, the reputation, deserved or otherwise." His jaw clenched. "You saw something else." "Why?" Bryony considered lying, considered deflecting with a joke or a platitude, but he'd asked for honesty. "Because I know what it looks like," she said softly. "When someone builds walls so high that even they forget there's something behind them." I've watched my father do it since his business failed. I've watched my mother do it since she got sick. She stopped, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing. I've done it myself. He stared at her for a long moment. Then perhaps, he said, his voice rough, you're the only person in this house who might actually understand. He walked away before she could respond, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Bryony watched him go, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Then the door behind her opened, and Minty's hand reached out to pull her inside. Was he dreadful? Minty pushed her into a chair by a crackling fire, pressing a teacup into her hands. He can be dreadful when he's nervous, gets all stiff and formal. It's unbearable. He was... Bryony searched for the right word. Honest. Ugh, even worse. But Minty smiled as she settled into the opposite chair. Now, tell me about yourself. Real things, not the fiction we're constructing. I want to know who I'm actually befriending. So, Bryony told her. She spoke of her father's business collapse, the creditors who'd stripped their comfortable life down to bare bones. She spoke of her mother's declining health and the medicine they couldn't afford, the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She spoke of Piers and his schemes, his good intentions that never quite translated into results. She spoke of the dreams she'd written in that letter, the longing for something beyond survival, the wish, foolish and impossible, that someone might see her as more than a problem to be managed. Minty listened without interrupting, her bright eyes growing thoughtful. And the letter itself, she finally said. What made you write it? Frustration. Anger. Bryony stared into her tea. Piers comes home with stories about this household, about your brother, mostly. How demanding he is, how cold. I built an image in my head of this cruel, untouchable aristocrat who destroys lives without noticing. And then I saw him, once, at a distance, leaving a charity event in the city. What did you see? A man standing apart from the crowd. The memory was clear, crystalline. Everyone else was laughing, talking, and performing for each other. But he just stood there, looking at nothing, and for a moment his face was open, unguarded. He looked like the loneliest person I'd ever seen. Minty set down her teacup. That was the anniversary of Father's death, she said quietly. Hadrian forces himself to attend public events on that day. Some sort of penance, I think. Punishment for not being there when it mattered. That's awful. That's my brother. Minty sighed. He carries guilt like other men carry swords. Refuses to set it down. Refuses to let anyone help him bear it. Our father was his hero. The one person who ever made him feel like he was enough. No, not just an heir to be shaped, but a son to be loved. Losing him broke something. Yes, Minty's voice cracked, and the rumors that followed made it worse. People whispered that Hadrian was relieved, that he'd wanted power, wanted the title, wanted father out of the way. It was monstrous and false, but he's never defended himself, just retreated further behind those walls you mentioned. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed. Bryony thought of the man she'd met last night, the fury and the threats, and the glimpse of something desperate beneath. She thought of the man she'd judged in her letter, built from rumors and resentment. She thought of how wrong she'd been. I'll help him, she heard herself say. Whatever this arrangement requires, I'll do it properly. Not because he threatened me. No, not because of Piers's debts. She looked up at Minty. Because I owe him that much, after what I wrote. Minty's smile bloomed slowly, warm and genuine. I knew I was going to like you. Before she could respond, the door opened. A footman in Ashworth livery entered with a bow. Miss Ashford, the Dowager Duchess will see you now. Bryony's stomach lurched. Already? Minty jumped to her feet. Grandmother said she'd wait until after luncheon. Her Grace has changed her mind. Minty and Bryony exchanged glances. Nothing good came from a dowager changing her mind. "I'll come with you," Minty said. Her Grace requested Miss Ashford alone. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Bryony set down her teacup and rose. Her knees felt unsteady, but she forced them to hold. She'd face the Duke at midnight, so she could face his grandmother in daylight. She hoped. "Where do I go?" The footman led her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past more portraits, more wealth, more evidence of a world she didn't belong in. Finally, he stopped before a door of dark oak, knocked twice, and opened it. "Miss Bryony Ashford, Your Grace." Bryony stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth sat in a high-backed chair by a window overlooking the gardens. She was perhaps 70, though she wore her years like armor rather than burden. Silver hair swept back severely, a black dress that spoke of permanent mourning. Eyes the same gray as her grandson's, but colder, sharper, like chips of winter ice. "So," her voice cut through the silence, "you're the one." "Your Grace." Bryony curtsied, and grateful her legs didn't buckle. "Thank you for receiving me." "I didn't receive you. I summoned you." The Dowager's gaze moved over her, cataloging every patched seam, every mark of poverty. "Sit." Bryony sat in the chair indicated, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. "My grandson tells me you're here as Araminta's companion." The words dripped with disbelief. "He tells me you met at a social event your brother attended. He tells me you've made a favorable impression on our family." "That's correct, Your Grace." "He's lying." The Dowager leaned forward. "Hadrian hasn't attended a social event in 18 months. Your brother is a junior secretary who's never been invited to anything above a servant's ball. No, and the only impression you've made is the one currently circulating through this household's gossip channels." Bryony felt her chest constrict. A woman, unknown, arriving in the Duke's private carriage at dawn, closeted with his sister, given rooms in the guest wing. "I assure you, I've already sent inquiries to London." The Dowager's eyes were pitiless. "By tomorrow, I'll know exactly who you are. Your family's circumstances, your brother's debts, every detail of your insignificant little life." Silence. The clock on the mantel ticked like a heartbeat. Bryony could lie. She should lie. The arrangement demanded it. But she remembered what Hadrian had said. "I find I prefer honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." If she was going to survive this household, she needed at least one person she hadn't deceived from the start. Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her chest. "May I speak plainly?" The Dowager's eyebrow rose. "Can you?" "Your grandson came to my home last night because of a letter I wrote. A private letter that was sent to the wrong address and is now being used to blackmail him." The words came faster, tumbling over each other. "I wrote things about him that were unfair and untrue, based on rumors, based on my own frustration with circumstances that had nothing to do with him. Someone copied that letter and is threatening to publish it unless he pays." The Dowager's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Go on." "He proposed an arrangement. I come here. I'm seen with him publicly. I tell anyone who asks that I was wrong about him, that I know him now, and my opinion has changed. It makes the letter worthless, takes away the blackmailer's power. And in exchange, my brother's debts cleared, my family protected. References when this is over." Bryony swallowed. "I know how it looks. I know what you think of me. But I'm not here to trap your grandson into marriage or steal your silver or cause a scandal. I'm here because I made a mistake, and this is the only way to fix it." The silence stretched. Then, impossibly, the Dowager laughed. It was a sharp sound, brittle with age, but genuine. She leaned back in her chair, studying Bryony with something that might have been appreciation. Do you know how many young women have sat in that chair and lied to me? Dozens. Scores. All of them convinced they were cleverer than an old woman who's been navigating society since before their mothers were born. I'm not clever, Bryony said. I'm desperate. There's a difference. Yes. The dowager's smile was thin as a blade. There is. She rose, moving to the window with the careful grace of someone managing aged bones. My grandson is damaged. You know that already. Or you wouldn't have written what you did about seeing him. The sad man standing alone. She paused. His father's death broke something in him. He's been sleepwalking through duty ever since, performing the role of duke without actually inhabiting it. Minty said something similar. Araminta talks too much. But there was no heat in the words. What she probably didn't tell you is that I've been trying to fix him. Marriage to Lady Perdita Harlow saw an alliance that would stabilize his position, produce heirs, give him something to care about beyond guilt and grief. He doesn't want to marry Lady Perdita. He doesn't want to want anything. The dowager turned. Wanting means hoping. Hoping means risking disappointment. He'd rather be numb. Bryony thought of her father, retreating into silence after his business collapsed. The parallels were striking. But you, the dowager's gaze sharpened. You walked in here and told me the truth. You didn't simper or flatter or pretend. Either you're genuinely honest, or you're the cleverest schemer I've ever met. I'm not clever, Bryony repeated. Then you're honest. The dowager moved closer. Which means I'm going to give you a warning, Miss Ashford. One warning only. Your Grace, my grandson has been dead inside for 2 years. Frozen. If you're here to help thaw him, then I wish you luck. The Harlow alliance was never about love. It was about duty. Perhaps duty isn't what he needs. And if I can't help him? The dowager's smile turned cold. Then you leave. Quietly. With your references and your family's debts cleared and not a breath of scandal attached to either of you. She paused. But if you hurt him, if you use this arrangement to wound him further, to manipulate him, to deepen his isolation, you'll destroy me. I'll do worse than that. The dowager's voice dropped to ice. I'll make sure you never stop running. The threat hung between them, absolute and believable. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. The dowager moved to the bell pull. Dinner is at 8. Dress appropriately. I'll have something sent to your room. Since I'm certain everything you own is unsuitable. She was gone before Bryony could respond. Bryony sat alone in the silent room, her hands trembling in her lap, trying to process everything that had just happened. The warning, the grudging respect, the impossible task ahead. She had to help a man who didn't want to be helped. She had to find a blackmailer hiding somewhere in this house. She had to survive a dowager who saw everything and forgave nothing. And she had to do it all while pretending to admire a duke she'd spent months despising. The door opened. A maid appeared with a curtsy. Miss Ashford, I'm to show you to your rooms. Lady Araminta says she'll visit before dinner to help you dress. Bryony rose on unsteady legs. Thank you. As she followed the maid through endless corridors, she caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the hall. A figure in dark clothing, watching from the shadows, watching her. Then they were gone, and Bryony was left with the chilling certainty that somewhere in this beautiful, terrible house, someone was paying very close attention. The guest chamber they'd given her was larger than her family's entire ground floor. Bryony stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to absorb the enormity of it. A 4-poster bed draped in silk the color of spring moss, a writing desk positioned by windows that overlooked a garden maze, a wardrobe that could hold 50 dresses, though she'd brought only 2. A private sitting area with velvet chairs arranged before a marble fireplace where flames already crackled against the afternoon chill. And flowers. Fresh flowers on every surface. Roses and lilies, and something purple she couldn't name, their fragrance filling the air like an embrace. "The green suite," the maid said, curtsying. Her Grace had it prepared specially. "Shall I help you unpack, miss?" Bryony looked at her single trunk, sitting forlornly by the wardrobe, like a stray dog at a feast. "I can manage, thank you." "Very good, miss. I'm Nell. Ring if you need anything." She paused at the door. "Anything at all." Then she was gone, and Bryony was alone with the terrifying luxury of borrowed existence. She unpacked methodically, trying to ground herself in routine. Her 2-day dresses looked even shabbier against the wardrobe's silk-lined interior. Her one evening gown, the pale blue she'd worn to her cousin's wedding 3 years ago, hung like a ghost of celebrations past. In her reticule, she found her mother's pearl earrings. She set them on the vanity table, where they caught the firelight and gleamed. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter." Minty swept in, followed by 2 maids carrying armfuls of fabric. "Don't panic," she announced, dumping herself onto the bed with cheerful disregard for propriety. "Grandmother sent these from her own collection. Apparently, she's decided you're a project." "A project? Someone to be improved upon." Minty grinned. "It's actually a good sign. She only bothers with people she finds interesting." The maids laid out dress after dress on every available surface. Silks in deep jewel tones, delicate muslins for daytime. Evening gowns that sparkled with embroidery Bryony couldn't have afforded in a lifetime of saving. "These are too fine," she protested. "I can't possibly." "You can, and you will." Minty held up a gown of amber silk. "This one for tonight. It'll bring out the warmth in your complexion. And don't argue. Grandmother's orders are non-negotiable." Bryony touched the fabric, impossibly soft against her fingers. "Why is she helping me? An hour ago she was threatening to destroy me." "That's grandmother." Minty shrugged. "She respects honesty. You gave her truth when everyone else gives flattery. Now she's invested in seeing what you'll do with opportunity. Or she's dressing me up for slaughter. Possibly both." Minty's smile was impish. "Welcome to the aristocracy." The maids helped her into the amber gown as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Bryony watched her reflection transform in the full-length mirror. The cut was elegant, the color rich against her dark hair, the fit somehow perfect, despite never having been measured for it. She looked like someone who belonged here. The deception twisted in her stomach like a knife. "Stop frowning." Minty appeared behind her, adjusting a curl. "You'll get lines." "I'm thinking." Dangerous habit. Try not to do it at dinner. She met Bryony's eyes in the mirror. "Hadrian will be watching. He always watches. And tonight, half the household staff will be observing the mysterious guest who arrived at dawn." "What do they know?" "Nothing specific. That's what makes it interesting." Minty turned her toward the door. "Come, I'll walk you to the dining room. And remember, spine straight, chin up, and never let them see you're terrified." "What if I am terrified?" "Then you're paying attention." Minty squeezed her hand. "But you survived, grandmother. Everything else is practice." The dining room was a cathedral of crystal and candlelight. A table that could seat 40 held only 4 place settings, arranged with enough silver to fund a hospital. Portraits of ancestral veins watched from the walls with expressions ranging from stern to actively disapproving. The dowager sat at the head of the table, resplendent in black silk and diamonds. Hadrian stood by the window, his dark evening clothes making him look even more severe than he had that morning. When Bryony entered, his head turned. His gaze swept over her, quick and assessing, and a shadow crossed his features. Surprise. Or hunger. She couldn't tell which, and the uncertainty made her pulse quicken. "Miss Ashford." The dowager's voice cut through the tension. "How refreshing to see someone arrive on time. Araminta could learn from your example." "I was helping her dress," Minty protested, sliding into her seat. "You were delaying because you enjoy making entrances." The dowager waved a hand. "Sit, Miss Ashford. We have much to discuss." Bryony took the seat indicated, across from Hadrian. He remained standing a moment longer, as if gathering himself. "Miss Ashford," he said formally, "I trust your rooms are satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory, Your Grace. Thank you for your generosity." "Thank my grandmother. She made the arrangements. I simply ensured our guest wouldn't embarrass us by wearing rags." The dowager sipped her wine. "Now, let us establish expectations for tomorrow." The first course arrived, and Bryony learned what real dinner conversation felt like among the aristocracy. It was strategic. Every word weighed, every response measured. The dowager led the discussion like a general planning a campaign, outlining social events, potential allies, and dangerous territory to avoid. Lady Perdita Harlow's name came up 3 times. "She'll be at the Marchmont Ball," the dowager said. "She's been expecting a formal announcement from Hadrian for months. Your presence will complicate her expectations." "I never made promises." Hadrian's voice was flat. "You didn't refuse her either." Silence implies consent in these circles. The dowager's gaze shifted to Bryony. "Lady Perdita is not a woman who accepts rejection gracefully. She has powerful connections and a vindictive nature. Tread carefully." "Is she a suspect?" The words escaped before Bryony could stop them. Silence fell over the table. "A suspect?" The dowager's eyebrow rose. Bryony felt heat climb her cheeks but pressed forward. "For the blackmail. Someone copied that letter. Someone in this household, or with access to the Duke's correspondence. Lady Perdita benefits if the scandal destroys his reputation. It would give her leverage." Hadrian set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "She's direct," Minty murmured into her wine glass. "I told you I liked her." "Lady Perdita is ambitious, not criminal," the dowager said slowly. "Though your logic isn't without merit. The blackmailer is someone closer." Hadrian's voice was quiet. "Someone who knew the letter existed before I did. Someone who watches the household." Bryony remembered the figure in the shadows, the feeling of being observed. "Then we're all in danger," she said. "Not just your reputation. If there's a traitor in this house, they could use any secret against anyone." The candles flickered in a draft from somewhere unseen. No one had an answer for that. Sleep came reluctantly that night. Bryony lay in the vast bed, silk sheets cool against her skin, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house. Creaking floorboards, distant footsteps, the wind sighing through ancient eaves. And once, just before dawn, the soft click of a door somewhere in the corridor. She rose early, dressing herself in one of the simpler gowns Minty had provided, a morning dress of pale lavender that felt like wearing clouds. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and fresh bread to a small breakfast room that caught the morning sun. Hadrian was already there. He sat alone at the table, a paper spread before him, a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and Bryony caught a flash of something before his expression shuddered. Vulnerability. Raw and unguarded. Then it was gone. "Miss Ashford, you're awake early." "I don't sleep well in strange places." She moved to the sideboard, helping herself to toast and preserves, with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years making do. "May I join you?" He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." She sat, spreading jam on her toast with precise movements. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. More like two wary animals sharing a watering hole. "You asked about suspects last night," Hadrian said finally. "At dinner." I spoke out of turn. "No, you spoke sense." He pushed his papers aside. "I've been trying to identify the blackmailer for 5 days, following the letter's path from receipt to my study, questioning servants who might have had access, finding nothing. Because you're looking in the obvious places." His eyes narrowed. "Where would you look?" Bryony considered. "The letter arrived at your London residence first, then was forwarded here." "Yes. My secretary in London handles correspondence." "Who else sees your mail?" "The butler. Perhaps a footman who carries it." He paused. "It's not exactly secured. Anyone with access to my study could have opened it before I did. But someone made a copy." Bryony leaned forward. "That takes time. Paper. The opportunity to be alone with the letter long enough to reproduce it. Who has that kind of access to your private correspondence?" "My secretary. My valet. The housekeeper in London." His expression hardened. "People who've served my family for years. Decades. Some of them. Loyalty doesn't preclude desperation." She spoke softly, thinking of peers, of herself. "People do unthinkable things when they need money or power or revenge. You think I've wronged someone without realizing it. I think you're a duke who makes decisions affecting hundreds of lives. Someone might feel overlooked, passed over for promotion, dismissed without adequate pension." She met his gaze. "Someone might blame you for something that wasn't even your fault." His hand clenched around his coffee cup. "Like my father's death." The words hung between them like smoke. "Tell me about him," Bryony said quietly. "Not the Duke. The father." Hadrian was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The words came out broken when he finally spoke. "He was everything I'm not. Warm, generous. He knew every servant by name, remembered their children's birthdays, laughed easily. His eyes grew distant. He used to take me riding before dawn when I was young, just the two of us. He said it was when the world was most honest, before people put on their masks. He sounds wonderful. He was. And I was in Scotland, arguing with tenant farmers when he fell ill." The bitterness in his voice could have cut glass. "My grandmother sent 3 messengers. I didn't receive them in time. By the time I arrived, he'd been dead for 2 days. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes stole her breath. "I should have been here. I chose duty over family, and he died alone." "He had your grandmother? Qua your sister? He wanted me." The words cracked. His last words were my name, asking where I was, why I hadn't come. Bryony reached across the table before she could think better of it. Her fingers touched his wrist, light and careful. "Grief isn't guilt," she said. "You're punishing yourself for something you couldn't control. Someone has to." "No." Her grip tightened. "No one has to. That's the lie we tell ourselves when we can't bear the alternative, when acceptance feels like betrayal." He stared at her hand on his wrist, at the point where her bare fingers touched his skin. "My father lost his business 5 years ago," Bryony continued, her voice soft. "A partner embezzled everything. Papa came home and told us we'd have to sell the house, the furniture, most of our possessions. He apologized for failing us. That wasn't his fault either. No. But he's never forgiven himself. He retreated into silence and never came back out." She withdrew her hand slowly. "I've watched guilt eat him alive, turn him into a ghost of the man he was. I won't watch you do the same thing." Hadrian's expression shifted. The walls he maintained so carefully showed the first hairline fractures. "Why do you care?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't know me. A week ago you wrote that I was devoid of human feeling. A week ago I was wrong. She held his gaze. I judged you on rumors and resentment. I was angry at the world, and you were a convenient target. That letter says more about my failures than yours. And now? Now, I'm trying to see clearly. She picked up her cold toast, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. Oh, it's harder than I expected. Silence fell again, but warmer this time, less guarded. The door opened, and a footman entered with fresh coffee. The moment shattered like glass. The Dowager Duchess wishes to see Miss Ashford in the conservatory, he announced, at her earliest convenience. Which means immediately, Hadrian said dryly. Go, don't keep her waiting. Bryony rose, but paused at the door. Your Grace, he looked up. Your father asked for you because he loved you, not to punish you. She swallowed. Maybe that's the part you should remember. She left before he could respond, but she heard, very faintly, the sound of his breath catching. The conservatory was a jungle of glass and greenery, tropical plants pressing against windows that overlooked the estate's formal gardens. The dowager sat in a wicker chair at its center, marked like a spider in a particularly elegant web. She was not alone. A woman stood beside her, tall and blonde, and beautiful in the way of classical statues. Her gown was the latest fashion, her pearls flawless, her expression pleasant in the way that concealed rather than revealed. Miss Ashford, the dowager gestured her closer. Allow me to introduce Lady Perdita Harlow. Dread pooled in Bryony's gut. So this is the mysterious guest? Lady Perdita's voice was honey over ice. I've heard such interesting things about you. Have you? Bryony kept her own voice neutral. I've only just arrived. Word travels quickly among certain circles. Those perfect lips curved. Your brother works for Ashworth, doesn't he? Piers Ashford. Such an ambitious young man. Such expensive tastes. The threat was delicate but unmistakable. My brother's habits are his own, Bryony said carefully, as are mine. Of course. Lady Perdita's gaze swept over her borrowed gown. Though one does wonder where the Ashford family finds the means for such improvements. That will do, Perdita. The dowager's voice cut through like a blade. You came to discuss the Marchmont Ball. Let us remain on topic. Forgive me, Your Grace. I was merely curious about our newest addition. Lady Perdita smiled at Bryony, all teeth and no warmth. I do hope we'll become friends, Miss Ashford. Hadrian speaks so highly of you. Does he? Oh, yes. Just this morning, he mentioned your candor. How refreshing he finds it. The pause was poisoned. After so many years of polished conversation, I imagine simplicity has its appeal. Bryony felt her hands clench behind her back. The insult was artfully veiled, the implication clear. She was simple, common, beneath notice. I find that honesty requires more courage than polish, she replied evenly. Anyone can learn to flatter. Speaking truth to power is rather more difficult. Something flickered in Lady Perdita's perfect blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of genuine dislike. How philosophical. She turned to the dowager. I should be going. Mother expects me for luncheon. We'll discuss the ball arrangements later? Indeed. The dowager inclined her head. Give my regards to the Countess. Lady Perdita swept out in a rustle of silk and subtle malice. Bryony watched her go, acutely aware that she'd just made an enemy. Well, the dowager said dryly, that was bracing. I apologize if I... Don't apologize. She deserved it. The old woman's eyes glittered. Perdita has been circling my grandson like a hawk for 3 seasons. She sees his title, his wealth, his position. She has never once seen him. And you were considering her as a match? I was considering stability, alliances, duty. The dowager sighed. But duty without feeling is a cold bedfellow. I watched my own son learn that lesson too late. The late Duke? Marcus married for love. His wife, Hadrian's mother, was passionate and brilliant, and entirely unsuitable by society's standards, a minor baronet's daughter with no fortune and radical opinions. A faint smile crossed her face. I opposed the match viciously. I was wrong. What happened to her? Fever. When Araminta was born, the smile faded. Marcus never recovered. He loved again in his way, but the light had gone out of him. He spent 20 years walking through life instead of living it. Bryony thought of what Hadrian had said, about his father's warmth, his generosity. Had that been performance too? Duty carried out in the shadow of grief? You think Hadrian is doing the same thing, she said slowly, walking through life instead of living it. I think he's doing worse. The dowager's voice hardened. He's refusing to walk at all. He's frozen in place, buried in guilt and work, and nothing I do reaches him. Not threats, not ultimatums, not even the prospect of dying without an heir. So, you want me to reach him? I want you to try. The old woman leaned forward. You broke through something at breakfast. Don't look surprised. Servants talk. He hasn't spoken about his father to anyone in 2 years. This morning, he spoke to you. How do you know that? Because when he left the breakfast room, he went to his father's study, the one he's kept locked since the funeral. The dowager's eyes were sharp. He spent an hour in there, alone. Then he emerged and asked for flowers to be sent to his father's grave. Emotion closed Bryony's throat. I don't know if I can help him, she admitted. I don't know if anyone can. Neither do I. The dowager rose, using her cane with practiced dignity. But you've already accomplished more in one breakfast than I have in 2 years. So I'm going to give you room to work. What does that mean? It means the arrangement continues. It means I'll deflect Perdita and manage society. It means you have access to my grandson in ways no one else does. She paused at the door. Use it wisely, Miss Ashford. Hearts are delicate things, even frozen ones. She swept out, leaving Bryony alone among the tropical plants, with a task she'd never anticipated. Somewhere in this house, a blackmailer was watching. Somewhere in the ballrooms of London, Lady Perdita was planning. And somewhere in a locked study, the Duke of Ashworth was finally beginning to thaw. Bryony just hoped she wouldn't be burned when the ice gave way. 3 days passed in a rhythm of careful observation and cautious conversation. Bryony learned the patterns of Ashworth Hall, which servants moved through which corridors, where the family gathered and where they scattered, the times when Hadrian retreated to his study, and the times he emerged, briefly, to fulfill some duty or another. She watched him constantly, not obviously, not in ways that would draw attention, but she watched, and the way he held himself in public, all rigid control and formal courtesy. The way that control slipped when he thought no one was looking, revealing exhaustion, sadness, something that might have been longing. He watched her too. She felt his gaze at dinner, during the afternoons when she sat with Minty in the drawing room. He never approached, never initiated conversation, but he was aware of her in a way that made her skin prickle with anticipation. On the 4th evening, she found him in the library. She hadn't been looking for him. She'd simply needed something to read, something to quiet her restless mind before bed. The Ashworth Library was legendary. 3 floors of books stretching toward a painted ceiling, ladders on brass rails, reading alcoves tucked into every corner. Hadrian sat in one of those alcoves, a single candle burning beside him, a book open on his lap that he wasn't reading. He looked up when she entered. Surprise flickered across his features. Miss Ashford, it's late. I couldn't sleep. She paused at the threshold. Should I leave? No. The word came quickly, then more measured. No. Please. Stay. She moved deeper into the library, breathing in the scent of old paper and leather and dust. Her fingers trailed along spines as she passed, reading titles in the dim light. "This collection is remarkable," she said. "Philosophy, poetry, history. First editions, some of them. My grandfather's passion. My father maintained it." Hadrian's voice was soft. "I've barely touched it since he died. Why not? Because books were our language." He closed the volume in his lap. We'd discuss what we were reading over breakfast. Debate philosophy during rides. He'd send me texts from London with notes in the margins. A pause. "Coming here feels like visiting a grave." Bryony pulled a book from the shelf at random. Shelley. "My mother used to read to me when I was small, before the money troubles, every night without fail. Stories and poems, and sometimes just her favorite passages from novels. When everything fell apart, she stopped. Why? She said she couldn't find the words anymore." Bryony opened the book, the pages whispering. "But I think it was more than that. I think the stories reminded her of who she used to be, before survival became the only priority. And you? Do you still read?" "Constantly." She smiled slightly. "It's free. Libraries don't charge for escape." Hadrian rose from his chair, moving toward her. The candlelight caught the planes of his face, all sharp angles and shadows. "You see things clearly," he said. "It's unsettling." "Is that a complaint?" "An observation." He stopped an arm's length away. "You wrote in your letter that I seemed sad, that you wondered what made me so closed off." "I remember." "Since then, you've seen my household. Met my grandmother, my sister. Been warned about Lady Perdita. Observed my habits." His eyes searched her face. "Has your opinion changed?" Bryony considered the question carefully. "I no longer think you're cold." "What do you think?" "I think you're terrified." The words came out gentle, not accusing. "You loved your father completely, and losing him broke something fundamental. Now you're afraid to feel anything that deeply again. Caring means risking loss. So you don't care, so you perform duty instead. It's safer." The silence stretched between them, electric and fragile. "Most people see the title," Hadrian said finally. "The wealth, the power. You see the fear underneath. Most people aren't forced to live in your house under threat of exposure." She met his gaze. "Proximity reveals things distance conceals." "Is that all it is? Proximity?" The question held weight she wasn't prepared for. "I don't know," she admitted. "A week ago, I despised you based on rumors. Now I'm standing in your library at midnight, trying to understand a man I'm not sure I have the right to understand." "And if you did? Have the right? Then I'd ask you something I've been wondering since that first night." "Ask." Bryony took a breath. "When you read my letter, the part where I called you sad, where I wondered if anyone had ever asked what made you close off, you said no one ever had. Not once. That's correct. But you came to my door at midnight. You could have sent a solicitor, threatened me by letter, dealt with this entire situation without ever seeing my face." She stepped closer. "Why did you come yourself?" His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he would retreat, rebuild the walls, deflect with coldness. Instead, he answered, "Because you saw me." 3 words, simple, devastating. "Everyone looks at me," he continued, his voice rough. "They see the Duke of Ashworth. They see money, influence, an eligible match. They see what they want to see. But you," he shook his head, "you saw a man standing alone at a charity event. You saw someone sad. You wondered what made him that way. I was watching from across the street. We never even spoke. It doesn't matter. You saw past the title to the person beneath, and then you wrote about it to someone else, which means it was genuine, not performance, not flattery." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "You were the first person in years to see me as human. And you didn't even like what you saw." "I didn't know what I saw," she corrected softly. "I saw pain. I assumed cruelty. Most do. I was wrong. Were you?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "I've spent 2 years pushing everyone away. My sister, my grandmother, every woman who's shown interest. I've been cruel in my isolation, even if I didn't intend it. There's a difference between cruelty and protection." Bryony's hand rose almost of its own accord, then stopped, hovering near his chest. "You built walls to survive. That doesn't make you a monster." "What does it make me?" "Human." Her hand finally touched his chest, feeling the steady pound of his heart beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. "Wounded. Possibly salvageable." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it closer. "My grandmother thinks you can reach me." His voice was barely audible. "She believes you can thaw something. Do you believe that?" "I believe you've already begun." His thumb traced circles on her wrist, small movements that sent electricity through her entire body. "I believe that terrifies me more than the blackmailer ever could." "Why?" "Because the blackmailer can only destroy my reputation." His eyes burned into hers. "You could destroy something far more vulnerable." They stood there, frozen in the candlelight, her hand against his heart, his hand holding hers in place. The library surrounded them like a sanctuary, silent and sacred. "I won't hurt you," Bryony whispered. "I know you have no reason to believe that. I know trust is earned, not promised. But I'm telling you anyway. Whatever this arrangement becomes, whatever happens when the blackmailer is caught, I won't use what I've learned against you. You barely know me." "I know enough." She stepped back, breaking the contact reluctantly. "I know you visit your father's grave when you think no one notices. And I know you keep his study locked because entering it feels like losing him again. I know you read the same passage of the same book every night, the one with his notes in the margins." His expression shifted. "How did you know about the margins?" "Because I saw the book." She gestured to the volume he'd been not reading when she entered. "It's the same one every night. You sit there, holding it like a talisman." Hadrian looked down at the book, then back at her. "It was his favorite," he said quietly. "Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He used to say it taught him how to carry duty without losing his soul." "And does it work? For you?" "I don't know." His voice cracked. "Some nights I read his notes, and I can almost hear his voice. Other nights, the words are just ink, meaningless." Bryony moved to the shelf where Aurelius lived among the other philosophers. She pulled down a companion volume, running her fingers along the spine. "May I borrow this?" "Why?" "Because if I'm going to understand you, I should understand what shaped you." She held the book against her chest. "Books are your language. You said so yourself. Maybe that's how we learn to talk." Something shifted in his expression, the walls cracking further. "Tomorrow," he said, "after breakfast. Meet me in my father's study." "The locked one?" "Yes." He swallowed visibly. "I haven't opened it for anyone. But you're right about proximity. Perhaps it's time I stopped hiding from what's inside." Bryony nodded, clutching the book like a promise. "Tomorrow, then." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Miss Ashford." "Yes?" "Bryony." Her name on his lips was a revelation. "You asked why I came to your door myself. The truth is, I don't entirely know. I was angry. I was threatened. I wanted to confront the person who'd seen me so clearly and still judged me harshly." "And now?" His smile was small, almost painful. "Now, I'm grateful you misspelled my address. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful." She left him there in the candlelight, the book pressed against her heart, the echo of her name in his voice following her through the dark corridors. Tomorrow, he would open his father's study. Tomorrow, she would step into his most private grief. And somewhere in the house, the blackmailer was watching, waiting, planning their next move. But Bryony couldn't think about that now. She could only think about the way Hadrian had said her name. Like it mattered. Like she mattered. Like everything was about to change. The morning after the library, Hadrian kept his promise. Bryony found him waiting outside a door at the end of the east corridor, a key turning over and over in his fingers. He looked as though he hadn't slept, shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes, his jaw tight with tension. "You came," he said. "You invited me." He nodded once, then fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire house. The study beyond was frozen in time. Dust motes swirled in the pale light filtering through heavy curtains. A desk dominated the center of the room, papers still scattered across its surface, as if their owner had merely stepped out for a moment. Books lined the walls. A pipe sat in a stand beside a leather chair, the cold ashes still visible in its bowl. Hadrian stepped inside and stopped, his shoulders rigid. "I haven't been in here since the funeral," he said quietly. "I kept meaning to sort his papers, deal with his correspondence. But every time I reached the door, you couldn't. I couldn't." He moved to the desk, touching the papers with careful fingers. He was writing a letter when he fell ill. To me. He never finished it. Bryony joined him, looking down at the familiar handwriting. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were legible. "My dearest son, there is something I must tell you. Something I should have said years ago, but never found the courage. You carry yourself as though duty is a burden to be endured, rather than a path to be walked with purpose. I fear I taught you that. I fear my own grief after your mother's death showed you that love leads only to loss, and loss to emptiness. But I was wrong, Hadrian. Love is not the wound. Love is what makes the wound worth bearing. Your mother gave me you and your sister. She gave me 20 years of joy that no amount of grief can erase. If I could choose again, knowing how it would end, I would choose her every time. I want you to know the letter stopped there. Unfinished. The pen had left a small ink stain where it had rested. He wanted me to love, Hadrian said, his voice cracking. He saw what I was becoming, and he tried to stop it. But he died before he could finish, before I could read it. You're reading it now. 2 years too late. Bryony touched his arm gently. Maybe not. Maybe exactly when you needed to. He turned to look at her, and she saw the grief breaking through the surface. Not the cold, controlled sorrow he'd carried publicly, but something raw and desperate. I've been so afraid, he whispered, of feeling anything, of wanting anything, because wanting means losing, and I couldn't survive another loss. You've survived this long, have I? His laugh was bitter. I've existed, performed my duties, pushed away everyone who tried to reach me. That's not surviving. That's hiding. Then stop hiding. She took his hand, holding it firmly. Your father wrote that love is worth the wound. Maybe it's time to test that. They stood there in the dust and silence, holding hands over his father's unfinished words. Something shifted between them, a door opening that could never be closed again. Then the clock in the hallway chimed, and the spell fractured. So the Marchment Ball is tonight, Hadrian said, not releasing her hand. Our first public appearance together. Lady Perdita will be there. Half of London will be watching. I know. Are you ready? No. She squeezed his fingers. But I'll do it anyway. His smile was small, but real. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then we'll face it together. They traveled to London that afternoon, the carriage eating miles while Bryony rehearsed conversations in her head. By evening, the city's glittering heart awaited them. The Marchment ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles. Bryony stood at the entrance, Hadrian's hand warm at the small of her back, and tried not to faint. She'd thought Ashworth Hall was overwhelming. This was something else entirely. Crystal chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, gowns worth more than her family's annual income. The cream of London society turning to stare as the Duke of Ashworth arrived with an unknown woman on his arm. "Breathe," Hadrian murmured. "You're magnificent." She was wearing the sapphire gown the Dowager had commissioned. Her hair was arranged with pearls Minty had produced from some mysterious source. She looked, as Nell had whispered while helping her dress, like a duchess. She felt like an imposter. "Everyone is staring," she whispered back. "Let them. They'll stare regardless. Give them something worth seeing." She lifted her chin, channeling every lesson her mother had ever taught about deportment and grace. Her spine straightened, her expression smoothed into pleasant neutrality. She became, for this moment, the woman the dress suggested she was. Hadrian led her into the crowd, so the next hour was a blur of introductions and careful conversation. Lord Marchmont, their host, who looked at her with curious approval. Lady Marchmont, who complimented her gown. Minty, appearing at her elbow with strategic timing whenever the questions grew too pointed. And through it all, Hadrian stayed close, not obviously possessive, but present, attentive in ways that made people notice. "They're talking about us," Bryony said during a brief respite by the refreshment table. "Of course they are. That's the point. The whispers aren't kind. They rarely are." He handed her a glass of champagne. "But whispers can be shaped. By the end of tonight, the narrative will be clear. The Duke of Ashworth has found someone who interests him. The Harlow alliance is no longer assured. Lady Perdita won't accept that quietly. No." His jaw went rigid. "She won't." As if summoned by her name, Lady Perdita materialized from the crowd. She wore white silk and diamonds, looking every inch the perfect aristocratic bride. Her smile was porcelain and poison. "Your Grace, Miss Ashford." She curtsied with exquisite precision. "What a delightful surprise to see you here together." "Lady Perdita." Hadrian's voice was cool. "You look well." "As do you. Though I confess I'm curious." Her eyes slid to Bryony. "I've been asking around about our mysterious guest. It seems no one knows quite where she came from." "Miss Ashford is a guest of my family. Her origins are her own concern." "Of course." That porcelain smile sharpened. "Though I did hear the most interesting rumor. Something about a letter." Ice filled Bryony's veins. "A letter sent to the wrong address," Perdita continued, her voice dropping to intimate conspiracy. "Containing the most scandalous opinions about a certain duke. Can you imagine? Someone writing such things and then having them delivered directly to the subject?" His expression tightened as he gripped his champagne glass. "Rumors are often exaggerated," he said flatly. "Oh, but this one comes from such a reliable source." Perdita's eyes glittered. "Someone very close to your household, apparently. Someone who thought I might find the contents illuminating." The implication hit Bryony like a physical blow. The blackmailer had contacted Perdita, had shared the letter, had enlisted her as an ally or a weapon. "If you have something to say, Lady Perdita, say it plainly." Bryony's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Innuendo is the refuge of those too cowardly for direct confrontation." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Perdita's smile froze, then reformed into something harder. "Very well. Plainly, then." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only they could hear. "I know everything, Miss Ashford. The letter, the blackmail, the charming little arrangement you've made with His Grace. And I have copies of correspondence that will make both of you social pariahs if they're published." "You're the blackmailer," Bryony breathed. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm merely a concerned friend who was approached by someone wishing to expose the truth." Perdita's eyes held triumph, But I could be persuaded to help suppress that truth, for the right consideration. What do you want? Hadrian's voice was deadly quiet. What I've always wanted. The announcement we discussed before your father's death. Her smile returned, sweet as arsenic. Marry me by the end of the season, Your Grace, and all these unpleasant documents disappear. Refuse, and Miss Ashford's letter will be in every gossip column by morning. The music swelled around them, couples spinning past in oblivious joy. You have until midnight to decide, Perdita added. Enjoy the ball. She swept away, leaving devastation in her wake. Bryony's knees threatened to buckle. The champagne glass shook in her hand. She's working with the blackmailer, she whispered. She's using my letter to force you into marriage. I know. If you don't agree, I'll be ruined. My family will be ruined. Everything. I know. Hadrian's hand found hers, gripping tightly. But I'm not marrying Perdita Harlow. Not for this. Not for anything. You can't sacrifice your reputation for me. It's not a sacrifice. His eyes met hers, blazing with something that stole her breath. It's a choice. The first real choice I've made in 2 years. Hadrian, dance with me. He pulled her toward the floor, where couples were gathering for a waltz. We have until midnight. I refuse to spend it cowering. The music began, and he swept her into his arms. They moved together through the candlelight, surrounded by enemies, balanced on the edge of destruction. And somehow, impossibly, Bryony felt safe. They danced until they couldn't breathe. 3 waltzes, 2 country dances. A reel that left them both laughing despite everything, drawing curious glances from those who expected scandal and found joy instead. But midnight approached like a blade. At 11:30, Hadrian drew her onto a balcony overlooking the Marchmont Gardens. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, the distant music muffled through closed doors. We need to talk about what happens next, he said. You can't marry her. I won't marry her. His voice was firm. But I also won't let her destroy you. There must be another way. What way? She has the letter. She has copies. She has whatever documentation the blackmailer provided. Bryony gripped the balcony rail. The moment that letter becomes public, I'm finished. My family is finished. Everything we've tried to build here collapses. Then we find the blackmailer first. Expose them before they can expose us. In 30 minutes, his expression hardened. No. But Perdita doesn't control the original documents. Someone else does. Someone who approached her as an ally. Which means the blackmailer is still in your household. Or was. Hadrian turned to face her. Someone who had access to my correspondence. Someone who might have grievance against me. Someone who would benefit from my downfall. Bryony's mind raced through everyone she'd met at Ashworth Hall. The servants who'd been welcoming. The staff who seemed loyal. Minty and the Dowager, both with their own agendas, but neither with reason to destroy him. Then another thought struck her. My brother. Hadrian's expression flickered. Piers? He has access to your London residence. He handles correspondence. He has debts, massive debts, that someone could exploit. Her voice broke. What if the blackmailer approached him first? What if he's the one who made the copy? You think your own brother would betray you? I think desperation makes people do terrible things. Tears burned her eyes. I think someone might have offered him money, or threatened him, or convinced him it would never be traced back. Piers loves me, but he's weak. He's always been weak. Hadrian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. We don't know it's him. We don't know it isn't. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other while the clock ticked toward destruction. I won't let this end you, Hadrian said into her hair. Whatever it takes, whoever the blackmailer is. I'll find them, and I'll stop them. You can't promise that. I can promise to try. He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. I can promise that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Why? Her voice broke. Why do you care so much? A month ago, you didn't know I existed. A month ago, I didn't know I was capable of caring about anything. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You woke something in me, Bryony. Something I thought died with my father. I don't know what to call it. I don't know if I deserve it. But I know I'm not willing to lose it. The clock inside began to chime midnight. They had run out of time. Go inside, Hadrian said. Find Minty. Stay with her until I come for you. What are you going to do? Talk to Perdita. Buy us more time if I can. His expression hardened. And if I can't, make sure she knows exactly what kind of enemy she's made. He kissed her forehead, quick and fierce, then disappeared through the balcony doors. Bryony stood alone in the darkness, the final chime fading into silence. She should go inside. She should find Minty. She should wait, as he'd asked. Instead, she made a different choice. If Piers was involved in this, she needed to know. She needed to face him. She needed to understand how her own brother could have helped destroy her. She slipped through the gardens, found a side entrance, and hailed a passing carriage. Ashworth House, she told the driver. London residence, as fast as you can. The carriage lurched into motion. Behind her, the Marchmont ball continued, glittering and oblivious. Ahead of her, answers waited, and none of them would be easy. Ashworth House in London was dark when she arrived. Only a few windows showed light on the upper floors, where servants might still be awake. The rest of the townhouse slumbered, unaware of the storm about to break. Bryony paid the driver and climbed the steps. Her borrowed gown was wildly inappropriate for the hour, but she didn't care. She rang the bell and waited. The butler who answered looked at her with barely concealed shock. Miss Ashford, it's nearly 1 o'clock. I need to see my brother, immediately. Mr. Ashford isn't here, miss. He left earlier this evening and hasn't returned. Her heart sank. Where did he go? I couldn't say, miss. He seemed agitated. Took some papers from His Grace's study and... The butler stopped, realizing what he'd revealed. Papers from the Duke's study. Bryony's voice was flat. What kind of papers? I'm sure I don't know. Perhaps you should come inside, miss. It's cold and... Tell me what you do know. She stepped past him into the entrance hall. Everything. Now. The butler, a man named Harwick, who'd served the Vane family for 30 years, looked at her with something approaching respect. Mr. Ashford has been meeting with someone, a woman. She's visited several times over the past few weeks, always when His Grace was away. What woman? I never saw her face clearly. She wore a veil, but her carriage bore the Harlow crest. Lady Perdita, of course. And tonight? What happened tonight? Mr. Ashford received a message. He read it, turned pale as death, and rushed to the study. He took several documents and left in a hired carriage. Harwick paused. He looked frightened, miss. Truly frightened. Bryony's mind raced. Piers had been working with Perdita, but something had changed tonight. Something had scared him badly enough to flee with whatever evidence he held. Where would he go? If he was frightened, if he was running, where would he run? I couldn't say, miss. But she could. She knew her brother, knew his habits, his escapes. When Piers was scared, he ran to familiar ground. When he needed to hide, he went where no one would think to look for a gentleman's secretary. Their childhood home. The house their father had lost, now owned by strangers, but with a garden shed that Piers had claimed as his kingdom when they were young. He'd hidden there during their father's worst rages. He'd hidden there when the creditors came. He would hide there now. Bryony turned for the door. Miss Ashford? Please. Harwick reached for her arm. Let me call a carriage. His Grace would want... His Grace can't know where I've gone. Not yet. She looked at the butler steadily. When he comes looking, tell him I'm safe. Tell him I've gone to find answers. But don't tell him where. Miss, please, Harwick, her voice cracked. My brother is many things, but he's still my brother. Let me try to save him before anyone else finds him. Something in the old butler's expression softened. There's a carriage in the mews. I'll have it brought around. 20 minutes later, she was moving through the dark streets toward the edge of London. The house she'd grown up in looked smaller than she remembered. It was past 2 when she arrived, the street silent, respectable families sleeping behind drawn curtains. The new owners had maintained the property well, fresh paint on the shutters, the garden trimmed and tidy. But she wasn't here for the house. She moved around the side, through a gate that still squeaked the way it had when she was 12, into the back garden where an old shed crouched beneath an overgrown apple tree. A light flickered through its window. She pushed open the door. Piers sat hunched over a workbench, papers spread before him, a single candle guttering. He looked up when she entered, and his face crumpled. Bree. His voice was a broken thing. How did you find me? I know you. She closed the door behind her. I've always known you. I'm sorry. Tears streaked his cheeks. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. She said no one would get hurt. She said, Lady Perdita. He flinched as if struck. She approached me months ago, offered money. So much money, Bree. Enough to clear my debts. Enough to give Mama the medicine she needs. All I had to do was copy some letters, watch the household, report back. You gave her my letter. I didn't know it was yours. His voice rose, desperate. I copied everything that came through the study. She wanted intelligence on the Duke, anything that might give her leverage. When your letter arrived, I copied it without reading it properly. I didn't realize until later what I'd done. Bryony's chest felt like it was caving in. You sold me out, for money. I was trying to save us. He reached for her hands, but she pulled away. The debts were crushing us. Mama was getting worse. You were working yourself to bone, and I couldn't do anything except fail. Again and again, nothing but failure. And then Perdita offered a solution. A solution that destroyed everything. I didn't know it would go this far. He gestured at the papers before him. When I realized what she was planning, I tried to stop it. I tried to get the copies back, but she had them secured elsewhere. All I could retrieve were these. Bryony looked at the papers. Correspondence, account books, records of transactions. What is this? Proof? Pierce's voice steadied slightly. Proof that Perdita's been embezzling from her family's estates. Proof that she needs this marriage because she's nearly bankrupt. Proof that everything she's built is a house of cards. She stared at him. You stole her secrets. I stole them back, his jaw set. She used me, made me betray my own sister. The least I could do was find something to fight with. The candle flame danced in the darkness. Bryony should hate him. Part of her did. The part that remembered every sacrifice, every penny counted, every dream deferred, because Piers couldn't stop chasing easy solutions. But he was still her brother. Still the boy who'd held her hand when the creditors came. Still the young man who'd tried, in his fumbling way, to protect their family. Does Hadrian know? She asked quietly. No. I've been too ashamed to face him. Piers wiped his eyes. He's a good man, Bree. Better than the rumors say. If I'd known, if I'd understood, you'd have done the same thing. Because you were desperate. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Yes, I would have. They sat in silence, two siblings surrounded by the wreckage of choices made in fear. Carl, we can still fix this, Bryony said finally. These documents, this proof against Perdita, we can use it. Against a countess's daughter, the Harlows will bury us. Not if we're not alone. She reached for the papers. Not if we have a duke on our side. The shed door burst open. Hadrian stood in the doorway, breathing hard. His evening clothes rumpled, his expression caught between fury and relief. I thought, he said, the words unpolished, that we agreed to face things together. I needed to find Piers first. She stepped toward him. I needed to know if he was the traitor. Hadrian's gaze moved to her brother, who shrank back against the workbench. I know. Harwick told me everything. Then you know why I came alone. I know you're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. He crossed the small space in 2 strides and drew her against him. I've been driving through London for an hour, terrified that Perdita had done something, that you were hurt, that I'd lost you before I had a chance to— He stopped. A chance to what? Bryony whispered. His hands cradled her face, his eyes searched hers. A chance to tell you that I love you. The words came out raw, unpolished, nothing like the controlled Duke she'd first met. I know it's impossible. I know we've only known each other for weeks. I know this started as blackmail and arrangement and everything wrong. But somewhere in the middle of it, you became the only thing that feels right. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I love you too. She gripped his wrists, holding on. I've been trying not to. Telling myself this was temporary, that I didn't belong in your world. But I can't stop. I can't. He kissed her. Not gently. Not carefully. He kissed her like she was air. And he was drowning. Like she was light. And he'd lived too long in darkness. She kissed him back with equal desperation, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When they finally broke apart, Piers had quietly moved to the far corner of the shed, studying the ceiling with intense interest. The documents, Bryony said breathlessly. Piers found proof against Perdita. We can use it. Hadrian looked at her brother. The anger hadn't faded entirely, but something else joined it. Understanding, perhaps. You betrayed me, he said quietly. Betrayed your sister. Put both our families at risk. I know. Piers met his gaze. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Starting now, Hadrian extended his hand. Give me those documents, and then tell me everything you know about Lady Perdita's operation. Piers handed over the papers. The 3 of them worked through the remaining hours of darkness, piecing together the full picture of Perdita's schemes. By dawn, they had everything they needed, and Bryony, exhausted but hopeful, finally began to believe they might actually win. Victory, she should have known, never came easily. They returned to Ashworth Hall as the sun rose, armed with documents and plans. The Dowager was waiting, Minty beside her, both wearing expressions of profound relief. You found them, the Dowager said. Both of them. Hadrian guided Bryony inside. It's over, grandmother, or it will be by tonight. They spent the morning preparing. Legal documents were drawn up. Messages were sent to allies in Parliament. The Dowager called in favors from contacts, cultivated over 50 years of social warfare. By afternoon, everything was in place. And then Lady Perdita arrived. She swept into the drawing room unannounced, her beautiful face twisted with fury. You think you've won? She thrust a newspaper at Hadrian. Read the afternoon edition. Bryony's heart plummeted. Duke of Ashworth in scandal. Correspondence damning letter reveals cold aristocrat's true nature. Unknown woman claims to have evidence of emotional cruelty. The letter. Her letter. Published despite everything. I told you midnight, Perdita said, her voice dripping satisfaction. You didn't accept my terms. So, I went to the papers. With forged documents and out-of-context quotes. Hadrian's voice was ice. Does it matter? By the time you prove forgery, the damage is done. Your reputation is destroyed. Your precious Miss Ashford is revealed as the common creature she truly is. Perdita's smile widened. And you'll marry me anyway, because it's the only way to salvage anything. No. The word came from the doorway. The Dowager stepped forward, a sheaf of papers in her hand. What you failed to consider, Lady Perdita, is that scandal cuts both ways. She handed the papers to Hadrian. These documents detail your embezzlement from the Harlow estates, your gambling debts, the creditors you've been dodging for 3 years, everything you've been hiding behind that pretty facade. Perdita's face went pale. Why, how did you— Your own spy provided them. The dowager's smile was razor thin. Mr. Ashford, it seems, has experienced a change of heart. That little worm is my brother. Bryony stepped forward, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. And he's given us everything we need to destroy you the same way you tried to destroy us. You wouldn't dare. The Harlows will be grateful we're not pursuing criminal charges. Hadrian set down the papers. Embezzlement is a hanging offense. Your family will do whatever necessary to make this go away. Silence fell over the room. Perdita's perfect composure cracked. She looked at them, one by one, seeing her elaborate scheme crumbling to dust. This isn't over, she whispered. Yes, it is. The dowager moved to the bell pull. So you'll leave this house. You'll leave London. And if you ever attempt to interfere in my family's affairs again, these documents will find their way to every newspaper in England. Do we understand each other? For a long moment, no one moved. Then Perdita gathered her skirts, her face a mask of hatred, and swept from the room without another word. Bryony sagged against the nearest chair. It's done, she breathed. It's actually done. But when she looked at Hadrian, his expression was troubled. The letter is still published, he said quietly. The damage to your reputation will heal. Scandal fades. The dowager's voice was firm. What matters is that the blackmailer is exposed and her leverage is gone. What matters, Hadrian corrected, moving to Bryony's side, is that this is over. But you're safe. But something in his eyes said otherwise. Something in the set of his shoulders suggested this wasn't the victory it should be. Hadrian? Bryony touched his arm. What is it? He pulled away gently. I need some time alone, to think. About what? He didn't answer. Just walked out of the room, leaving her with the dowager and Minty, and a creeping dread that something had gone terribly wrong. What just happened? Minty asked. The dowager sighed. He's realizing what the published letter means. For her. For any future they might have together. But we won. Did we? The old woman's gaze was sad. That letter calls him cold, cruel, emotionally unavailable. And Miss Ashford wrote it. No matter how much has changed between them, those words exist. They'll follow both of them for years. The truth hit Bryony like a physical blow. He was pulling away. To protect her. To spare her the association with a scandal he believed was his fault. She found him an hour later in his father's study. He stood by the window, staring at nothing, the unfinished letter on the desk before him. You're ending this, she said quietly. Aren't you? He didn't turn. You should go home, Bryony, back to your family. The debts are paid. The references are arranged. You have everything we agreed to. Everything except you. That was never part of the agreement. The agreement is done. She moved closer. This is something else entirely. This is me protecting you from myself. His voice faltered. That letter is published. Your words, calling me a monster. If you stay with me, you'll spend the rest of your life defending a man you once despised, explaining, apologizing, watching people whisper every time we enter a room. I don't care. You should. He finally turned, and she saw the devastation in his eyes. I've already cost you so much, your reputation, your privacy. I won't cost you your future too. My future is my choice. She reached for his hands. I wrote that letter when I didn't know you. Before I understood your grief, your fear, the way you carried duty like a wound. I was wrong then. I'm not wrong now. Bryony, you told me you loved me. Her voice strengthened. In that shed, hours ago. Did you mean it? You know I did. Then stop trying to save me from wanting you. She gripped his hands tighter. I'm not asking for easy. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for you. All of you. Even the parts you think are too broken to deserve love. He stared at her, warring with himself. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. How to let someone in. How to be what you need. Neither do I. She smiled through her tears. We'll figure it out together. His resistance crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. She held him back, feeling his heart pound against hers. Stay, he breathed against her hair. Please, stay. I'm not going anywhere. The study door creaked, and Minty's head appeared. Are you two done being dramatic? Because grandmother is planning the wedding announcement, and she wants your input on the font. They broke apart laughing, tears and joy mingling in equal measure. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for both of them, that was more than enough. The wedding, when it came, was nothing like anyone expected. The dowager had planned for St. George's, 1,000 guests, a dress from Paris, the event of the season. Hadrian had other ideas. They married in the small chapel at Ashworth Hall on a morning bright with unexpected sunshine. Only family attended. The dowager in her finest black, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she'd never admit to owning. Minty in pale pink, serving as bridesmaid. Piers, still earning back trust, but present nonetheless, standing as witness. Bryony's mother had traveled from London, tears flowing freely as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk. Her father stood straighter than he had in years, something like hope rekindled in his eyes. And Hadrian waited at the altar, wearing an expression Bryony had never seen on him before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The vows were traditional. The kiss was not. He pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly enough to make the dowager clear her throat. There will be time for that later, the old woman said dryly. We have a wedding breakfast to attend. The breakfast stretched through the afternoon, then into evening. Someone produced champagne. Someone else found a violin. Before long, the Great Hall of Ashworth had transformed into an impromptu celebration, servants and family mingling in ways that would have scandalized proper society. Bryony danced with everyone. Hadrian. Piers. The old butler Harwick, who moved with surprising grace. Even the dowager, who permitted one slow turn around the floor before declaring herself too old for such nonsense. But as the sun set and the candles were lit, Hadrian drew her away from the celebration. He led her to the library, their library, where so much had changed between them. I have something for you, he said. He handed her a leather-bound book. Not old, like his father's collection, but new. The cover was embossed with her initials. B.V. Bryony Vane. She opened it. The first page held her letter. The original, written in her own hasty hand, all the words that had started everything. The second page held his response, written in his precise script, dated from the night after their first meeting. Miss Ashford, you wrote that I seemed sad, that you wondered what made me so closed off. You were cruel in your assessment and entirely correct. I should hate you for seeing me so clearly. Instead, I find myself wondering what else you might see, if given the opportunity. The pages continued. Letters he'd written but never sent. Observations from their weeks together. Moments he'd noticed. Conversations that had changed him. The final entry was dated that morning. Today, I marry the woman who wrote me a letter she never meant to send. Today, I begin a life I never expected to want. Today, I choose love over safety, hope over fear, and presence over performance. My father was right. Love is worth the wound. And you, my dearest Bryony, are worth everything. She closed the book, tears streaming. It's a correspondence, Hadrian said. One-sided until now. But I thought you might like to write back. You kept everything. Every thought. Every moment I felt myself waking up. He cupped her face. You did that. Quattro, you brought me back to life. We brought each other back. She kissed him softly. Partners, remember? Partners. His smile was brilliant. I rather liked the sound of that. 3 years later, the opera house was crowded. Bryony settled into her seat, adjusting the skirts of her emerald gown. Beside her, Hadrian handed programs to Minty and her new husband, a pleasant viscount who'd won her heart by laughing at her jokes and keeping up with her endless energy. The dowager occupied the seat of honor, complaining about the draft while secretly enjoying every moment. And in Bryony's lap, carefully bundled, their daughter slept. Victoria Rose Vane. Vicky, as her doting father insisted on calling her, to the dowager's eternal despair. She'll wake during the second act, Hadrian murmured. She always does. Then we'll take her to the corridor. She likes the echoes. Our daughter has strange taste. She's her father's child. He grinned, pressing a kiss to her temple. The lights dimmed. The music began. 3 years, and sometimes it still felt like a dream. The scandal had faded, as the dowager predicted. Lady Perdita had retreated to the continent, her family's reputation salvaged, but her own prospects ruined. Piers had proven himself, eventually becoming Hadrian's most reliable secretary. And the letter. The famous letter that had started everything. It lived in their library now, framed beside Hadrian's responses. Sometimes guests asked about it. Sometimes Bryony told the story. Most times, they simply smiled and changed the subject. Some things were too precious to share. The first act ended. Victoria stirred. Bryony rose to take her to the corridor, but Hadrian's hand on her arm stopped her. Let me. He lifted their daughter with practiced ease. You stay. Enjoy the music. You'll miss the second act. I've seen it before. His eyes met hers, warm with love. Besides, I'd rather spend the time with her. She's only small once. He carried their daughter out, murmuring softly, and Bryony watched him go with a heart so full it ached. She thought of the woman she'd been 3 years ago, desperate, frightened, writing angry letters in the dark because she couldn't imagine anything ever changing. That woman would never have believed this ending. But then again, Bryony thought, settling back as the second act began, the best endings were always the most unexpected ones. The music swelled, and somewhere in the corridor, the Duke of Ashworth walked with his daughter in his arms, finally present, finally whole, and finally home. On the night of their 5th anniversary, Bryony found Hadrian in the library. He held a letter in his hands. New paper, fresh ink, addressed in a handwriting she didn't recognize. What's that? A correspondence, he smiled. From Victoria. She's been writing to me in secret, apparently, observing her father's habits, cataloging my failings. Bryony laughed. She's your daughter. She wrote that I work too much, that I carry tension in my shoulders, that I seem sad sometimes when I think no one's watching. His voice softened. Sound familiar? She moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. Dear Papa, Mama says you used to be closed off, that you built walls around your heart because you were scared of being hurt. I don't understand how anyone could be scared of love. Love is the best thing in the whole world. But I'm glad you learned not to be scared anymore. I'm glad you let Mama in. I'm glad you let me in too. Sometimes I catch you looking at us like you can't believe we're real, like you're afraid we'll disappear. But we won't, Papa. We're not going anywhere. Not ever. I love you. Your daughter, Victoria Rose Vane P.S. I know where you hide the biscuits. I won't tell Mama if you share. Bryony wiped her eyes. She's 5 years old, Hadrian said, his voice thick. How does she understand so much? She's been watching. Bryony leaned against him. The same way I watched, That first day at the charity event. Some people just see. He set down the letter and gathered her to him. I sent a letter to the wrong address once, he murmured. No, I did. Same thing. His smile was everything. It was the best mistake either of us ever made. They stood there in the library, surrounded by books and memories and a lifetime still unfolding. And outside the window, snow began to fall on Ashworth Hall, covering the gardens, the paths, the world beyond. Inside, there was only warmth, only love, only the knowledge that sometimes the right words find the right person, even when we send them to the wrong address, even when we never meant to send them at all.